other nations that were overtaken. And in our dispersal, we said year after year, next year in Jerusalem, we want to come back to this land that you see around you. And it's defying these laws of history with the faith and purpose that we had that enabled us to get back here.
In the wake of the pogroms in Russia and the Holocaust in Europe, Jews are returning en masse to their ancient homeland.
You stop and think about what the Jewish people were facing prior to the rebirth of the Jewish nation, being persecuted by the Nazis. 6 million of them exterminated in concentration camps. But then those horrific events actually played a part in causing the Jewish people to realize we've got to take care of ourselves. We've got to fend for ourselves. We can't depend on others to take care of us. So they returned back to their homeland.
They are the only nation in the history of the world that has come back after 1,700 years of losing their homeland. No nation in history has survived more than 500 years. But here the Jews all over the world have been brought back in my generation into the Holy Land, and they are a separate people. They're a nation. First time in 1,700 years. That in itself is a miracle, but it's a fulfillment of God's promise and His faithfulness to Israel.
Talking about the Lord's return was a little premature prior to Israel's becoming a nation. And of course, once they became a nation, then the stage was really set for the Lord to return.
Jesus tells us to learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branches are yet tender and it puts forth leaves, summer is near. So likewise, when you see these things begin to happen, know your redemption is near. And of course, the fig tree in Scripture speaks of the nation Israel. So her regathering in the land is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And that was really against all odds.
With the eyes of the entire world watching in stunned amazement, Israel declares her independence. For the first time in more than 2,000 years, the Jewish people are once again a sovereign nation. The joy of independence, however, is short-lived. The Islamic world is enraged. No sooner has Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion declared the resurrection of the Jewish state than 7 Arab nations attack with all their fury. Overnight, 800,000 Jews find themselves at war with 50 million Arabs. The fledgling Israeli army has not a single tank. Their enemies have 2,000. Yet amazingly, Israel not only wins their war of independence, but succeeds in establishing herself as the only democracy in the modern Middle East. Israel's enemies, however, do not give up. Instead, they regroup, rebuild, rearm, until they're ready to strike again. The leaders of the Arab world vow to throw the Jews into the sea. The Soviet Union sells the Arab powers $2 billion worth of arms, tanks, and fighter jets. Soviet military advisors flood the region, training Arab forces, and even designing a strategy to destroy Israel. June 1967. Surrounded by Soviet armed enemies and on the brink of another Holocaust, Israel strikes hard, fast, and without warning. In just 6 days, Israeli forces stun the world. They crush the combined Arab armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. They quadruple their land, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. they reunify Jerusalem. They bring the Temple Mount back under Jewish control for the first time in 2,000 years. Some call it a triumph of Zionism, a tribute to the skill and cunning of the Israeli Defense Forces. Others call it a miraculous victory, the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. But for the Arab world, the Six-Day War is known as Al-Nakba, the disaster, and they vow revenge. In the months that follow the war, the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, launches one terrorist attack against Israel after another. Meanwhile, the Arab states once again regroup, rearm, and prepare to strike again. October 6, 1973. The streets are quiet throughout Jerusalem. Preparations are underway for Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Israeli soldiers are in synagogues, as is most of Israel's population. Then, all hell breaks loose. The combined Arab forces of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, aided by the Saudis, the Libyans, and others, launch a massive and devastating sneak attack. In the first week of the war, the Arab coalition makes stunning gains. In the north, 1,000 Syrian tanks and 600 pieces of Syrian artillery mow down Israeli forces, aiming for Jerusalem. While in the south, some 400 Egyptian tanks cross the Suez Canal, wipe out Israel's forward defenses, and race across the Sinai Desert, also hoping to recapture the Holy City. By the second week, however, momentum begins to shift. Amidst brutal, bloody combat, the Israelis retake most of the territory they have briefly lost. Soon, their forces are within striking distance of Damascus and Cairo. The Soviets begin a massive airlift of arms and ammunition to their Arab allies. The U.S., in turn, begins a round-the-clock airlift of arms and supplies to Israel. And then comes an ominous turn. October 24th, Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev sends American President Richard Nixon a chilling message. Force Israel to accept an immediate ceasefire, or the Soviet Union will take direct action against Israel. In response, the Pentagon orders U.S. nuclear forces to DEFCON 3, and President Nixon fires back a message at Brezhnev. We must view your suggestion of unilateral action as a matter of the gravest concern, involving incalculable consequences. Faced with the prospect of a global thermonuclear war with the U.S., the Soviets finally back off. The Israelis agree to a ceasefire. The world steps back from the brink of disaster. Once again, Israel has miraculously survived. Since 1948, the eyes of the world have been riveted on the epicenter throughout one spasm of violence after another. Sadly, the history of the Middle East, both ancient and modern, is one of wars and rumors of wars. And now, a new crisis is brewing.
In the world of radical Islam, there are really only two categories. True followers of Allah who are committed to jihad, to a holy war, and there are the infidels, namely Jews and Christians, but they can also include Muslims who are not committed as devoutly to jihad as the jihadists think they should be.
In Islam as a dogma, the idea of salvation, there is only one way that you can assure yourself to go to paradise. It's not like the Christian dogma in which you believe in the death of one, Christ. By that, a sinless person who died on your behalf, you go to paradise. In this case of Islam, the way to assure yourself to go to paradise is by dying yourself as an offer to God.
سبيل الله قمنا